Raji, I welcome you today in our session, and this session is about scope management. So I think we all are here except for Kuratulan. He is not going to be here today and tomorrow. But anyways, we start off. As far as the scope is concerned, this is one of the most important subjects naturally after integration, because integration was responsible for putting it all together. So this is the next important thing, scope management. And in scope, we establish the detailed scope of the project and the product as well. Rather, I would say, first we establish the scope of the product we are going to deliver and we are going to create, and then we uh, develop the project scope. So as we move ahead, you will see how these things interact. So let me first bring it to the screen. Okay, as you have already seen when we were discussing the interaction of various knowledge areas and the process groups, that scope was one of those areas which had a lot many processes in planning. Out of the 6 processes, 4 processes from scope are in planning, and rest of the 2 remaining processes are in monitoring and control. The very first process, plan scope management, is responsible for developing the scope management plan. And not only the scope management plan, this also needs to have a requirement management plan. Now, this is something very different from all other knowledge areas, because most of the knowledge areas have only one management plan. This has got 2. Why? Because requirements in itself is a big business, is a huge activity, and when we are trying to gather all the requirements from various stakeholders and we compile those requirements, even then people keep changing their minds and requirements keep changing as well. Moreover, the stakeholders also, they keep changing. So this has to be a live document, and not only a live document, but this has to be managed quite thoroughly. And your scope is greatly dependent on the requirements. Therefore, it is discussed in scope management, but it is a separate management plan, the requirements management plan, and it contributes towards the scope management plan. First, the requirement management plan is developed, and then the scope management plan is developed. But if you want to kind of prioritize them, scope management plan is a greater plan. Requirement management plan only deals with the requirements. You remember in initiation, after we had the charter as a project managers, the very first thing we did was to identify all the stakeholders. Although stakeholder management is also a knowledge area, and it is the 10th knowledge area, the very last chapter, but it was the very first thing we did to identify the stakeholders right in initiation. And when we did that, what was the purpose of it? Basically, we wanted to understand our stakeholders, their needs, their expectations, and we wanted to cater those needs and expectations into the project. Now, generally speaking, when you have the charter, naturally you must have some agreement with internal or external body who has assigned you this job or who has given this project or contracted out this project to your organization. They have given you a contract, they have signed a contract, they have given you a requirement. So therefore, some people may think, some project managers may think that that is enough and they do not need to interact with anyone else. But as I specified earlier, stakeholders, no matter they are your customers or not, whatever capacity the stakeholder is, he may impact your project, and you can see, for example, there is a contractor who I am constructing a house, and this contractor is providing me the steel. Now, according to the design, the customer has asked, there has to be a specific size of steel designed for the roof. And my contractor tells me that that specific size of steel is not available in the market and will not be available in the market for next 6 months. So what options do I have? Either I delay the construction by 6 months if I have to follow the same design, or I redesign. That is the change in requirements. And if the requirements change, I have to go back to the customer and ask him this query, and this may tantamount to change in contract. So you see how big a change one single stakeholder can cause to the whole project. And this I am talking about only one stakeholder. There are many other stakeholders who can impact the project in one way or the other. Therefore, whatever is written in the contract, whatever requirements have been given to you, they are not the final requirements. They can and may be amended. And moreover, as an impartial, unbiased person, project manager has to listen to all, and all such requests which are genuine must be catered, and he must put those requirements in front of his boss or the customer for that matter and get them approved if they can be. And if they are not approved, then naturally you will follow whatever you were supposed to be doing already. Anyways, so we need to have these two management plans. And just to recall you, the management plan, whether it is a scope management plan or a requirement management plan, is not the detail of the plan itself. This is just the guideline. This includes only the policies and procedures we are committing to follow in all the processes related to this knowledge area. So the requirement management plan would apply to those processes dealing with requirements, and scope management guidelines would apply to all those processes dealing specifically with scope. So if I don't talk about monitoring and control right now, and I exclude 5.5 and 5.6 from here, as far as the planning is concerned, plan scope management will apply on 5.2, 5.3 and 5.4. Collect requirements, define scope and create WBS. And naturally, it will have instructions for 5.5 and 5.6 also, because this scope management plan applies to them all. But as far as the requirement management plan is concerned, we are to specifically follow it in 5.2 only. That is the collect requirements. And once the requirements are established, that those requirements are converted into scope, and then we are following the scope. So there is no need to carry requirement management plan any further. That is exactly why I said that scope management plan is higher in priority, greater in size than the requirement management plan. But because the requirements have their own individuality and they may change over time, therefore we have to have a proper management plan for that, and therefore we created a requirements management plan. So in plan scope management process, we have created two management plans, requirements management plan and the scope management plan. Now, as I just said, when we move on to collect requirements, that is specifically for the purpose of getting to the stakeholders and understanding their needs and expectations and establishing certain requirements. I understand some of the stakeholders will be giving absurd kind of requirements which are by no means to be included into the scope. So what you can do is you can talk to them, you can try to make them understand that the requirement is not genuine and it cannot be accommodated. And I hope that in most of the cases they will understand if you can put the case more logically. If the requirement is genuine, then you must put it up to the higher authority for approval and inclusion into the project. And maybe that was something which was kind of ignored somewhere. And the people who are sitting up there, maybe the customer or the sponsors or whomsoever, governance board or project board, they would rather be happy that you have found a missing requirement and they will allow you to put it into the scope. If they don't, then there is no problem. You can keep working as you were working. In case there is a stakeholder who is asking for a non-genuine requirement, which is not really, cannot be placed into the scope of this project, and you have tried to make him understand, and this stakeholder is not ready to budge, then probably he cannot be handled by you. For this, you will raise an issue, make an entry into the issue register, and escalate the issue to the next higher level to decide on it. So whatever is decided from up there would be implemented. But naturally, it is extremely important that you do collect requirements from everybody and you do not ignore anyone. No matter there is a good requirement or a bad requirement, genuine requirement or a non-genuine requirement, absurd requirement or professional requirement, whatever the requirement is has to be jotted down, and then you filter through them and sort out those requirements which are supposed to be included in the scope and put it up to your sponsor or the board. Once the requirements have been established, you will end up with a comprehensive requirements document. A comprehensive requirements document, and also you must create another thing, and that is a requirements matrix. What is a requirements matrix? You will study in subsequent slides, but requirement matrix is an instrument, is a tool by which you trace your requirements to the deliverable. So this was the requirement and that is the deliverable. So how are they connected? Every requirement must be connected to the deliverable. If it is not connected to the deliverable, that means that requirement is not being fulfilled. Similarly, if there is a deliverable which is going to be created and you have planned for it and there is no requirement for that deliverable, then probably that deliverable should not be produced because it is not in the requirements. Therefore, there has to be a traceability matrix which will track the requirements down to the product. And naturally, in this process, there would be activities and other processes coming in which will connect these two dots. After you have, established the requirements, now establishing the requirement just means that you have understood what all is to be included in the scope. And that is the scope of the product. In defined scope process, the third process, in defined scope process, you create a very important document, and that is called the scope statement. Scope statement is the most detailed version of scope you can ever have. This is created by the project manager and there is no further detail he could have put into it at this moment in time. Due to uncertainty, there might be some changes to the scope in future and project manager would remain responsible for adding or subtracting something from the scope, naturally with due permission. But you see, scope is up to some extent, this is kind of finalized. Just give me a moment. Right. So where were we? We were talking about the defined scope, and the output is scope statement. Now this scope statement is, as I said, extremely important. But you see, people do have an idea that scope is not only here in the scope statement. We do have a scope when we were creating the business case. We do have a scope when we were doing the feasibility. We do have a scope when the statement of work was being created. We do have a scope when the charter was being developed. And there are so many places where the scope of this project was given and discussed and written. Then why are we doing it now? Now, you see, when we were trying to do the feasibility of the project, we had a very, little idea of what we want to create. The scope at that stage was not by any means detailed. We just had an idea this kind of a thing is to be produced by this project. So is it feasible or not? Similarly, in business case also, rather, sometimes we can mix the feasibility study and the business case, but anyways, the business case also defines the scope in a very high level. When it is in charter, I don't know what you understand what the charter is, but charter is again a very high level document, and it is just responsible for authorizing the project manager to mobilize the resources for the project. And naturally, some scope is given there as well. You see, with every step, this scope keeps getting elaborated, and ultimately, this is the time when it is by the project manager, who is the person who is going to be doing this project with his team. He is the person who is putting the final touches to the scope, and when he establishes this detailed scope, he will get it approved by the bosses, and only then he can do further planning and ultimately the implementation of the project. So without scope, you can't move a single step ahead. You have to have a definite scope on which you have to base your further plan and your execution. Therefore, the major output from here is the scope statement. We'll talk about it more. Now, okay, let me describe a few ingredients from the scope statement. First of all, I do have the requirements. I do have the contract based on which we are doing this project, contract or agreement, whatever kind of document was that, and we were given certain requirements in that as well. So after having catered for the needs and expectations of the stakeholders, and after having included the requirements after due diligence into the scope of the product, I now am in a position to clearly define what my product would look like. That means I know the specifications, functions, features, and everything about the product, not how the product is being made. What is the product? What are the dimensions of the product? What are the capabilities of the product which I am supposed to be producing? So as far as the product scope is concerned, we will define that in detail in scope, in defined scope process. Once the product scope is defined, we will move on to the project scope, and project scope will include all the work required for the purpose of fulfilling the product scope. All the work required in the process of fulfilling the product requirement, meaning that when we try to produce that product according to the specifications, features and functions given in the product scope, all the work involved to do that would be included in my project scope. And this can include only that work which contributes to the deliverable. Any work which is not contributing for the formation of that deliverable should be out of scope. So within the project scope, all the work and only the work required to be done to create the product of that specification of that functions and features. This is my project scope. So once I have the product scope and the project scope, and project scope exactly tells me how to do it. Now, digging a bit deep into how to do it, that is, I might have more than one ways to do that job. I know what to make. I know generally how to make, but there could be about 10 different ways of doing this job. I am supposed to identify all those alternatives. If they are not known to me, I have to generate those alternatives. I have to analyze them. And after having thorough analysis of those alternatives and having done the pros and cons with them, I will then be in a position to select the most appropriate one. And that is exactly the method how I intend doing my project. And this may differ from project to project and from project manager to project manager. One project manager may opt for one option, another for another, but both are right in their might. So as far as the scope approach is concerned, we have selected that. And once you have selected the approach, the next work would be to break your project open into broad sections. And that is exactly what we studied in project lifecycle. And those broad sections are surgically separate from each other, and we used to call them phases, and some people call them stages. So breaking the selected approach into phases, naming those phases, and identifying the product of each phase and the acceptance criteria for each product of the each phase is all included in my scope statement. And there are some other things which could be included in scope, and that could be maybe they're optional, but they will be defined later also. But like, what are the major risks in the project, what are the limitations, what are the constraints, what are the assumptions. So these kind of details can be provided if available. Now once this is done, my scope statement, which actually justifies the project, is ready. Without this document, there was no justification for doing this project. Someone can say that charter was a justification. Charter included a justification. Of course it did. Charter must include a justification for the project, and that is the alignment of your project to the organizational objectives. But that was given by the project sponsor, and that might be his point of view, but he did not know the things as the project manager knows in detail. So when project manager physically sees the work and he finds that this is completely undoable, he may turn back to his sponsor and inform him that these are the reasons why this project should not be done. Therefore, this is now the justification being provided by the project manager to the project sponsor, and if project manager justifies it, project sponsor would naturally go for it, because this is exactly what he wanted, that a justification be provided for that. So he will approve the scope statement. And once he approves the scope statement, we move on to the next and last step in planning from the scope management side, and that is now to break this whole thing, the scope, into smaller parts till we can see the deliverables. So we have to break our project, our phases, into smaller and smaller and smaller tasks, and ultimately the lowest level is of a work breakdown structure. We are trying to create a work breakdown structure. The lowest level of our work breakdown structure is work package, not activity. Normally people think the lowest level of a work breakdown structure is an activity. I don't have a big, objection to that, but generally speaking from the PMI point of view, uh, actually WBS is created for the purposes of project management, and project manager's interest is no more than the work package, because he has to control the project with these work packages. If there is a construction of the house, then the wall of a house could be a work package, which may include some menial jobs or activities like, putting up the bricks and, cementing it and plastering it and painting it and all that. So those activities are done for doing this whole package. So project manager might not be interested in the minor things like plastering and, so he may delegate that control to his supervisors and they can look after that job, but project manager needs the progress report of the wall. So that might be the work package. Well, wall is not a work package, wall is a product. Wall, the work which will be done to make the wall is the work package. So how would we name it? How should we call it? What is the name of this work package by which we are making the wall? Gee, anyone going to help me that give it a name?
Sir, can you repeat, sir?
I want to name this work package by which we are constructing a wall. Assuming that the output, the delivery.
Sir,
Construction of?
Wall.
Right. Very good.
Superstructure.
Well, let's restrain ourselves to the wall. Construction of wall. So construction of wall, what does it tell us? Construction of wall tells us that we are going to be constructing a wall. But from the perspective of the project management, it should be something like an executive order. This work package should show to do something. So how should we name it now? Give it force. Enough. Construct wall, right? So although you can say construction of wall, I have no objection, but generally the rule for that is that it should be a short name which should start with a verb and end with a noun. Verb is construct. Wall is the noun. So that way the thing becomes more executive and you exactly know that this is the job to be done. Now construction of wall can be all right, but that is kind of a heading or our description. So this is how we name our work packages. And within this work package, there could be more than one activities. And group of these activities would actually result in the construction of the wall. You see, now in a house, there could be many work packages. And for every work package, you might have one or more than one supervisors assisting them, getting those jobs done, and those supervisors may be reporting to the project manager and maybe on daily basis or hourly basis or whatever they have selected, and keep intimating the project manager what is happening and how much has been done. And project manager is only interested in the work packages. He is plotting his progress according to the work packages. Naturally, if some supervisor will have a problem in laying the bricks, he may come to project manager, this is the problem I'm facing, how can I solve it? So at that stage, project manager may go down to the activity level, but as far as from the point of view of monitoring and control is concerned, he is more interested in the work packages. Therefore, that is the reason that Create WBS develops a work breakdown structure broken down to work package level only. Work package is the lowest level of a work breakdown structure. Once that is done, all the work in the planning of scope is supposedly complete. Now we can get into execution or whatever, but WBS is complete. And what do we do when we have done all the work in planning of any knowledge area? What should we do?
Sir, execution should start.
No, we need to get this thing, the total scope be approved by the boss. And that, what do we call that?
Baselining, sir.
Baselining. And you remember that we needed to have a baseline, especially for three things: scope, time, and cost. We said all other knowledge areas may live without a baseline because whatever changes come in any other knowledge area will ultimately impact either scope or time or cost. And here we are discussing scope. So the last process of planning scope would result in a scope baseline. Similarly, last process of time will result in formation of a schedule baseline. Last process of cost will, in planning, will result in the formation of cost baseline. And these are the three major baselines which we are interested in, and they are responsible to get the job done in execution. So we are not entering into execution as such, but we are baselining. Baselining means that we are getting them approved by the boss. जी ये कुछ कह रहे थे?
No, sir, thanks.
Okay. Right. Once that is done, you have baselined it. Let us discuss what is included in a baseline. A baseline, especially this baseline, scope baseline, consists of three items. One is the scope statement we created in 5.3 define scope. Second is the work breakdown structure itself. And there is yet another third thing, and that is work breakdown structure definition, or you call it dictionary, WBS dictionary. What is a WBS dictionary? It is just like, once you have created the work breakdown structure, do any of you have an idea what a WBS should look like? Have you ever seen a WBS?
No, sir.
Okay. I was afraid you would say this is something like you never even heard about.
Sir, what we have seen, it is detailing orders, but not the classical WBS kind of thing.
Okay. And to tell you the truth, if you have never created a WBS, you have never done a project at all. Comments? You can't move ahead.
Then, sir, we need to change our statement, sir.
You see, without WBS, you can't create anything in a project. You can't have activities. You can't have the network diagram. You can't have the Gantt chart. How can you do the project? And all of these steps I just said, they are all important. But, that is ironical that all the projects going on around us, they skip many of the steps and they jump to certain conclusions. Like you see, we very bravely come up with a Gantt chart, and in few minutes maybe few hours effort, we come up with a Gantt chart and we are very happy that we have done wonders. And we just simply start getting into the execution. I said Most of your time as a project manager must be spent in planning. You remember there were maximum number of processes in planning. Maximum number of processes were in planning. So it is not wrong to say that 40 to 60% of a project manager's time is spent in planning. Our planning should be given 40 to 60% time of the project. If you do that, then it is just like, everything is just like an operation, almost like an operation, because you have laid down the rules and now you are just going to be walking on those steps. There will be uncertainties, there will be changes, there will be risks, but they will be much, much lower than when you jump into a situation without thinking. We are being proactive. We have thought a lot, planned well, and now when we enter into the project, we are prepared. Now, if anything goes wrong, something still will go wrong. If anything goes wrong, we can fix that. And only that thing has to be fixed. Okay. So that's it. I must introduce, we have got another member today, and that is Mubashir Ehsan from Lahore. He has attended an earlier course with me many years ago, and I invited all my old students if anyone wants to join. So Mubashir is a good friend also. He opted for it and he is with us. It is his first class. Naturally, he is missing a lot of the portion which is already covered. So, Mubashir, I will get you that material. I'll give you a link on OneDrive, as well as all the lectures are available on YouTube. So you can have all that material ready, because probably what you studied was from the older version, and now we are following the 5th edition. Which was the version when you did it? जी मुबशिर जी गाजी
Sir, are we still on the first slide of the lecture?
हाँ जी मैं वो पहली स्लाइड ही रखी हुई है मैं तो अभी डिफाइन कर रहा था आई वाज जस्ट दिस वाज इंट्रोडक्शन
Thank you, sir.
राइट मुबशिर आप सुन रहे हैं आवाज आ रही है oh okay right so once we have the scope baseline set, then the things become very simple, because now you remember we studied that during execution, scope, time and cost as such they do not exist, because all of these three baselines we had approved, they have formed part of the project management plan, and it is now the responsibility of integration to execute all of them together. That is the process named as direct and manage project work. So as such, there is no requirement to have any process from scope or time or cost in execution. So it will be integratedly executed, and when it does happen, automatically scope will be fulfilled, time and cost will be spent, and we just have to be worried about the results. And results we check in monitoring and control. So in monitoring and control, we have two processes of scope. One is the validate scope and the other is the control scope. Validate scope process is classically linked to the deliverables, whereas control scope deals with the process. It checks the process, how well some job has been done. And if something has not been done according to the desired level, then probably we have to correct it, change it. So it will analyze the situation, and if there is a change, it will move the change request. As far as the validate scope is concerned, that is the process which deals with the deliverable. And if you remember correctly, what we said earlier, when the deliverable is produced from execution, There are only two processes in monitoring and control which deals with the deliverable. The very first process is quality control. This is from the area of quality management. Quality control verifies the deliverable. If the quality is okay of the product, then it verifies the deliverable, and the verified deliverable then passes on to this process, validate scope. The responsibility of validate scope is to do the user acceptance, and if something passes through validate scope, it is considered to be accepted by the user and is called accepted deliverable. It is called accepted deliverable. Now, it might be, the user might have himself come and checked the scope here. He could have done the user acceptance by himself, or he could have authorized you to check the scope according to a checklist. Whatever the case may be, when the user acceptance is done, the item is ready to deliver. It is in accepted form, and we give that to the closing process group for final closeout of the activities and everything, and handing over of that product to the customer. So validate scope is essentially the very last process of monitoring and control, after which the deliverable goes out of monitoring and control and gets into closing process. So generally I have given you the whole picture. I have almost revised how the scope really works, and now let me change the slide. You were very much worried about the slides are not changing, so let us change them. But most of the things I have discussed, I hope and I wish that you have listened carefully and you understand what I'm talking about. Probably the written material on the slides is going to be just a help, nothing more than that. What we have discussed is the whole crux of scope management. Project scope management includes the processes required to ensure that the project includes all the work required and only the work required to complete the project successfully. Now listen to it very carefully. This is a very important sentence. All the work required and only the work required. What does that mean? We are trying to create a deliverable. To create that deliverable, all the work required to be done is within the project scope. Therefore, all the work must be done. You can't ignore or skip some of the work, because if you do, then that deliverable will never be created in the same specifications. And it says only the work required. If you keep doing other works which are not related to the product, they will not contribute to the development of the product, and they will be redundant activities. And why are we spending money on redundant activities then? There is no need to do any work which is not required, which is not contributing towards the creation of the product. So we should do all the work required to produce that product, and we should not do any work which is not contributing to the product. And if we go by this definition, by the way, we have defined scope. Anything which is to be done is within the scope of the project, and anything which is not to be done is out of the scope of the project. Managing the project scope is primarily concerned with defining and controlling what is and is not included in the project, in scope and out of scope. This you have to decide. Okay, I'll not go into the detailed definition of these 6 processes, because I have already talked a lot about them, and I will just like to skip on to the next slide. And again, product scope and project scope, this I have defined, but let us read through it. Product scope, this is the features and functions that are to be included in a product or service. Very simple definition, very simple definition. So product scope does not have to do anything with the work of the project. Product scope just tells you what the customer will have. And the requirements given by the customer and all other people, all other stakeholders have been catered for in the product scope. All the features and functions the product will have is the product scope. If one of the capabilities which the product should have is not there, the product is incomplete. The whole scope of the product is not met. The story stops here. Okay, once the product scope is established and agreed, then we move on to the project scope. Then we identify all the work which is required to be done to deliver the product according to those features and functions described in product scope. You see, they're very similar, but at the same time, product scope is not dealing with how to do it. Product scope is dealing with what to create. Define what to create in detail. That is product scope. How to do is the project scope. Now, how do you measure the product scope and the project scope? To measure the product scope, you need to have requirements in front of you, as if you can compare what has been created and what had to be created. So this is called measurement of product scope. How do you measure your project scope? That is, what had to be done and what has been done. That is all written in the plan. The project management plan includes what had to be done and what is done. So you can compare that, and that is the measurement of your project scope. So product scope is measured against the requirements and project scope is measured against the plan. आप लोग मेरे साथ हैं?
जी सर साथ
समझ तो आ रही है ना? मतलब सिंपल सी बात है, कोई इतना ज्यादा हमने कोई वो मुश्किल चीज को एड्रेस नहीं किया. Then we talk about the scope statement. Scope statement, as I said, scope statement is the most detailed statement of the scope ever created. Although we did have scope in various other documents, but that was too high level. This is first time project manager after his assignment is digging deep and finding all the nooks and corners of the product and the project. The scope statement is to be defined here. This scope statement not only provides the justification for the project, but also defines all the major deliverables and the project objectives. Although this is in light of the charter and naturally it is aligned with the strategy of the organization, but how is it aligned with the organizational strategy? What are the objectives of this project? This all has to be justified here. If project manager thinks and he can justify that the project which has been assigned to me is completely undoable, this is the time he speaks. Or else, hold your peace forever. So project manager, by creating the scope statement, by providing the justification for the project, now takes on the responsibility by his own will on his shoulders that yes, this is doable and I am the person to do it and I'll do it. So this is kind of a commitment from the project manager because it is based on the detailed scope. And he also justifies here the criteria which will be used to determine if the project or a phase has been successfully completed. How would we know that the product of the project is complete? What are the conditions? What are the critical success factors? What are the KPIs? How would I know? But because in projects, it is easy to measure. If I'm constructing a wall, it is supposed to be 20 feet high and this much long and this much strong. So naturally, we can establish a criteria for that, and we can pass the wall if it fulfills certain criteria. And that would be done in validate scope. So we have to define the ultimate completion of the project, how it is defined, how it will be proven, that what is the criteria of checking the house or the wall, whatever is the product, when it is done. And also each phase, we had broken our project into surgically separate phases, and we said each phase could be treated as a project and will actually be treated as a project, because every phase will pass through the same cycle of initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and close. So there is some deliverable of each phase, and if there is a deliverable for each phase, you must establish a criteria for the passing of that phase. Therefore, with every phase also being treated like a project, you have a phase charter. You have to have a project charter for the whole project, and you will have a phase charter. Every phase will be chartered, and that would be the responsibility of your sponsor to give you the charter. What all should be included in your scope statement? Again, as I've been saying time and again, thus PMI just provides you some guideline. It does not provide you a format, because if they do, then probably people who are trying to follow PMP-OK, they will take it as a Bible and they will start using exactly the same format, and they will start saying everything else is wrong. But this is not true, because the PMP-OK applies to wide range of projects from various industries, countries and cultures, and therefore one format cannot fit all. Therefore, PMI has left it onto you as a practitioner to create your own format for your organization. An organization can regulate, they can create a format and they can impose that format within their organization, and others may like to copy and they can tailor it to their own requirement, but PMI is not going to give you a format as such. So in the scope statement, the project objectives should be clearly defined, project justification should be clearly given. What is the main deliverable of this product? What is the description of the product scope and the project scope? What are the product acceptance criteria? What are the phase deliverables? What are the project exclusions, like meaning what is not included in the project, what is out of scope of the project, and then are the project assumptions, constraints, and so many other things. These are just few things. So this generally would be defining the scope statement. Just hold on. Rizwan sir. जी रिजवान साहब क्या कहें?
सर ये प्रोजेक्ट जस्टिफिकेशन क्यों है? तो चार्टर में भी आ गई है, हर जगह आ गई है बार बार, तो व्हाई इन स्कोप स्टेटमेंट वी नीड द प्रोजेक्ट जस्टिफिकेशन? बाकी सब चीजें ऑब्जेक्टिव्स में और डिलीवरेबल्स में तो कवर हो गई हैं स्कोप से रिलेटेड.
Okay, the problem is that the justifications that had been provided at various earlier levels were never the justification from the project. Project manager ने कभी justification नहीं दी थी. That was when the business analyst was doing the feasibility study. He thought it okay, go ahead, and this found it feasible. He had his own justification at that time, which today might not apply. Right? Today, that justification which was provided 3 months ago may not stand good today. But if we base all our calculation and everything on that justification, the project manager is in a thick soup. As the project was elaborated at every step, everyone created a justification from that point of view. But this project manager is the person who is held responsible, who has been made responsible to actually do the project. How can he do the project when he is himself not convinced that this project can ever be done? So his justification, if he provides a justification, this project can be done, I will do it this way, then it is a commitment from the project manager and it will be approved as such. But I'll give you an example. There was a project going on for the digitization of passports in Pakistan, and passport office did ask for some consultants, and I was also called, but not they were not trying to hire me. They were trying to ask me to help them do that. I mean, to select the consultants and all that. So they selected a person, and his name was also Suhail, and he was selected, and he took the charge as a project consultant. And basically, he was kind of a project manager, because there was just a nomenclature was project consultant. Otherwise, he had to do everything. Anyways, so I did provide some guidance to him as well, and then I just forgot about it. After about a year or so, I passed by the passport office and I thought maybe there is some construction going on. Let's go see what's happening there. So I just walked into the passport office, and there I met Mr. Suhail again, and I asked him what's happening, what's the progress of your project. The answer he gave me astonished me. He said, project has yet not started. I said, what are you saying? It is 1 year ago you were hired for the project and you say project has not yet started? What do you mean? From where are you getting paid? You are a staff of the project. From where are you getting paid? He said, from the project budget. I said, if a single penny was ever spent from the project budget, the project has started from that day on. How do you justify your stay on project for 1 year along with your team and doing lot many things I can see, but you still claim the project has yet not started? Do you understand my point?
Sir,
जी बोलिए.
सर जस्टिफिकेशन इज रिक्वायर्ड, एवरीथिंग इज फाइन, लेकिन स्कोप में क्यों है? चार्टर में भी हमने लिख दिया स्कोप में वी सेड के ओनली व्हाट इज टू बी डन एंड ऑल दैट इज टू बी डन. जस्टिफिकेशन की जगह मुझे थोड़ी सी जरा समझ नहीं आ रही सर. व्हाई इन स्कोप स्टेटमेंट? स्कोप में तो जो है जो हमने काम करना है.
if I go by
जस्टिफिकेशन तो पिछली बात है.
नहीं, स्कोप में तो काम करना है, लेकिन क्या ये स्कोप वायबल भी है कि नहीं है? The viability and the feasibility you did was older one, was done by someone else, and he had a different perspective, and especially he was not the one who had to do it. He could have said it can be done. He could have provided his reasons and all that, but practically it is on the person who has to do it. He has to say that I can do it. I asked you to jump with a parachute because everybody can do this. You should also do it, but you don't want to do it. You see, either the project manager has to be changed in that case, or the project has to be changed. Something is wrong somewhere. Maybe the project manager is not good enough. Then he has to be changed. If the feasibility and everything is right and he is afraid of doing this job, then this project manager is not going to make the project a success. If he is not convinced from his heart, then probably this project cannot be done. Another example, similarly, in another project, I asked somebody in a common project, what are you doing? He said, well, we are doing a project and this and that. So I said, how are you doing it? And he explained me certain things, which I said, they are all wrong and your project will never succeed. He said, I know that. I said, then why are you doing it? He said, just because मेरी नौकरी लगी हुई है भाई. मुझे काम करने दो, मेरा बॉस कहता है ऐसे करने तो ऐसे करना है, काम कोई नहीं होना। अब बात यह है कि इफ यू आर you cannot be a yes man and a project manager. Anyone who is a yes man, he is not a project manager. Project manager has to speak up. He has to behave like a consultant to his boss. He has to put him wise because the responsibility of work is on his shoulders. And if he's sincerely trying to do something, he will take uh, take it head on, and only when he is confident. That is exactly why before properly defining the product scope, he first identifies whether it is okay to do it or not. For example, you see, there was a strategic justification provided earlier that the strategic objective of the organization is to, say it is to make money only, right? So whatever we are doing is for the purpose of making money. The project which has been given to you is to open a charity school. How will we make money out of it? Should the project manager not question it? If the strategic objective from the organization is that we are only here to make money and we will only do those jobs which will make money for us, then why someone has ordered you to create a charity school? Your project is this, and this is by no means in alignment with the organizational strategy. No matter, there might be a justification, no matter what, but apparently this is not visible, and project manager has all the right to object to that. Either change your strategic objective or tell me how are we going to achieve this strategic objective by doing charity project. So once he asked that, then he would be appropriately replied. Probably they will show you a government rule that every private concern is supposed to donate this much money from their profit every year, and out of that money we are doing this charity. So this is now legalized. This is now justified. But if no such justification exists, then there is absolutely no reason to do it. A lot many projects we are doing in our country are rudderless, completely rudderless. They are not actually going to benefit anyone. They are just myths. We are creating those projects just for the heck of it. They are not of use to anyone. I'm not saying that comparably they are not of use. They are absolutely of no use. And still we are doing it because we don't do the proper scoping. Clear up to some extent?
Sir.
Okay, let us then move ahead, taking each process one by one. Plan scope management, as I told you, is the process of creating a scope management plan that documents how the scope will be defined. How the scope will be defined. We are not defining a scope in the scope management plan. How the scope will be defined, and there would be another process for doing that. How the scope will be validated and controlled. And all those processes we studied, plan scope and what was that? Collect requirements, plan scope, and create WBS. All these processes were actually defining the scope. Validate scope and control scope, these are the two processes we have found in the monitoring and control. The key benefit of this process is that it provides guidance and direction on how the product scope will be managed throughout the project. So, बुनियादी तौर पे this is just the guidance and direction. This is not the detail of each and every step. The WBS, the work packages, they are not known at this stage. Yes, scope statement, scope management plan can tell you how to create a WBS. specifically for this project, there might be certain requirements only for this project that the WBS can use this kind of facility. Maybe there is a software in the market and company has recently acquired that and they say WBS will be created using that software. So these kind of policies would be there, but what the WBS will look like, we don't know as yet because nobody has created it so far. Okay, one correction. In this previous slide which we were talking about, here it is in the process of creating a scope statement plan. Sorry, it's wrong. It's a scope management plan. The word statement is wrong here. Now, scope management plan, guidelines for how scope is to be managed and how scope changes are to be integrated into the project. And scope management plan includes an assessment of the stability of the project scope. The kind of project we are getting into, scope management plan will provide specific instructions of how to do scoping. So it will assess how stable the project is. As far as the scope is concerned, is the scope likely to change too often in this project? If we are dealing with a lot of uncertainty, if there are a lot many changes expected from this project all the time, then it is a less stable project. If I am doing something which is amply clear that I have to create a house of 3 bedrooms and small little changes here and there, but the house will remain of 3 bedrooms, then this is a kind of a stable project. A clear description of how scope changes will be identified and classified. How will you deal with the scope changes? How would you know that a scope change has started knocking on the door? The scope management plan is a component of the project management plan that describes how the scope will be defined, developed, monitored, controlled, verified, and so on and so forth. Scope management plan is a major input into project management plan and all the scope management processes. Because basically this is a guideline to be used by all the scope management processes, especially in planning. Scope management plan can be formal, informal, broadly framed, or highly detailed based on the needs of the project. That is exactly why we are not ready to disclose any format for that. Organization to organization, it will differ. Some people need more detail. For complex project, we need to have even more detail. And on some projects, scope management plan could even be just a one-pager. But I don't recommend it to be a one-pager. It should be, good instructions provided. But it depends upon the size of the project and the complexity of the project, the type of the project. The components of scope management plan should be process for detailing a detailed project scope statement. How can we create a detailed project scope statement? How we are going to be creating the WBS? How the WBS will be maintained and approved? How the formal acceptance of the completed deliverable will be obtained? User acceptance. Somebody has to sign it off and only then our payment will be released. So what is the procedure for that? Then the process to control how requests for change to the detailed project scope standard will be processed. So change mechanism is also included. This process is directly linked with the integrated change control. Why? Because all the changes are actually approved or rejected by integrated change control, which is the process of integration in monitoring and control. And you remember this is the same process where the change requests are sent. All the change requests, no matter from where are they coming, they are actually being processed by this process, perform integrated change control. This is its responsibility to process any change requests. Something about the requirements management plan. This is again a component of project management plan, and the purpose is how requirements will be analyzed, documented, and managed. We have to document all the requirements. We have to talk to the stakeholders, collect their needs and expectations, analyze them, document them, and then manage. This is as far as the requirements are concerned. The phase-to-phase relationship strongly influences how requirements are managed. So if one phase must be fulfilling some specific requirements, the other phase would be addressing another set of requirements, and so on and so forth. So we can divide our project into phases according to the requirements. The project manager chooses the most effective relationship for the project and documents this approach in the requirements management plan. So project manager establishes the requirements management plan. Many of the requirements management plan components are based on that relationship. Components of requirement management plan can be how the requirement activities will be planned, tracked, or reported. Configuration management activities such as, I did talk about configuration management yesterday. Configuration management was change management of one thing, how a specific change is to be brought into the system. Configuration management was keeping record of all the changes, all the documents, and all the deliverables. So configuration management as related to the requirements, naturally the configurations will change, requirements will change. Configuration management should include how changes to the product will be initiated, who is allowed to initiate the change request on the product, how these impacts will be analyzed, who will analyze how this change has impacted us, how they will be traced and reported, the authorization levels required to approve those changes. So this all is part of the requirements management plan. Requirements prioritization process. How do you prioritize the requirements and which requirements are to be done first? It's a very major subject nowadays. People are talking about requirements prioritization because the new lean technology and agile technology, they talk about delivering maximum value as early as possible. So those items which can create maximum value must be done earlier. But anyways, I'm not discussing the lean, but generally speaking, they have to have some kind of requirement prioritization. Product metrics that will be used and the rationale for using them, they must be clearly defined. Traceability structure, how the requirements will be able to be traced to the product. Requirements can be classified. Some requirements are business requirements, some are stakeholder requirements, and the requirements you collect from the stakeholder could be functional in nature or non-functional in nature. There could be certain transition requirements. When we'll complete this project, what are the conditions, what are the requirements which are to be fulfilled to move this product to the customer site or as if they can use it. What are the specific project requirements? What are the people expecting from the project? How good the project should be? What are the quality requirements? So these are some of the requirements which we will take care when we collect the requirements. So we talked about the plan scope management. Now once we have understood what the scope management plan is and the requirement management plan is and what this process does, now if you look at the inputs, outputs and tools and techniques, you will find there is nothing to be worried about. Everything here is already known to us. Do you not remember that project management plan has to be an input to this process, or for that matter to any process in planning, execution, monitoring and control? I said project management plan anyways is to be input to everything because that contains instructions for how to create this process. Because this is one of the beginning processes and there is not much of input coming from outside, so the project charter is an instrumental document. It's a flagship document which the story will be built based on the charter. There are only, if you remember the integration process where the charter was created, developed charter, you remember where the charter was being distributed? It was being distributed to the scope management, plan scope management. plan time management, and a few other processes, identify stakeholders, identify risk, and procurement. So these were the few places where the copy of charter was distributed to. Because these things cannot move ahead without knowing the charter. And the charter is the flagship, is a key input coming into it. So charter carries this value, but subsequently, once say the scope management plan will be developed, we will no more require the charter for any process of the scope, only here. No, we also need it, specifically in scope, we need it for defined scope also. But anyways, general rule is that charter is only initially required, and later on the output from that process would definitely become the input of subsequent processes, and therefore the need for charter will slowly eliminate. Enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets, we already know about it and we have already talked about it a lot. So we know that these two inputs are required by almost every process of project management, and especially in initiation and planning, this has to be there. Both of these things have to be there. We use expert judgment and we conduct meetings with our staff and team members, and here we decide, or we fill in the scope management plan, the requirements that are created here. So the output, as you understand, are the scope management plan and the requirements management plan. If you look at it from this angle, that how different things are coming from where, and what where the copies of the outputs are moving to. You see, here is something interesting. Enterprise environmental factor and organizational process assets are naturally coming from the enterprise or the organization, but and charter is coming from develop charter, and develop project management plan is coming from develop project management plan. This much is okay. Let's talk about the outputs. There are two outputs: scope management plan and requirement management plan. Requirement management plan, as I briefed you earlier, is clearly shown to only be going to collect requirements, whereas scope is also required for collecting requirements. Both these management plans are required here. But management plan is no more required by any other process. Therefore, this is not going anywhere else. But scope management plan is required by each of these processes. And the last process, create WBS, this is where the things finish, as far as the planning is concerned. Here we waste time of things. So these are just the description of all those tools, techniques, and outputs. Next process is collect requirements. Now, in collect requirements, naturally, our requirement management plan and scope management plan is the input to this, and they have got sufficient guideline for me to collect requirements from my stakeholders, and I have already got the stakeholder register which has the list of all the stakeholders. So I would be requiring the stakeholder register, requirement management plan, scope management plan, and maybe the stakeholder management plan. So all these things may be required to collect the requirements. Collect requirements is the process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet project objectives. The key benefit is to provide the basis for defining and managing the project scope, including the product scope. Basis, you see, if these requirements are ultimately going to be checked against the output. So product scope is genuinely established through these requirements. So what is the stakeholder involvement in it? You see, stakeholder plays an important role, and for the success of any project, that is directly influenced by the active stakeholder involvement in the discovery and decomposition of needs into requirements, and by the care taken in determining, documenting, and managing the requirements of the product, service, or result. So requirements include conditions and capabilities that are to be met by the project or present in the product, service, or result to satisfy an agreement or other formally imposed specification. So requirements, they could be quantifiable or qualitative in nature, but generally they have got our documented needs and expectations of the sponsor, and therefore we are, taking care of the stakeholder needs, and ultimately it will help, these requirements will help us grow WBS, cost, schedule estimates, and everything else. So this is one of the initial process of the scope. Categories we have already talked about: business requirements and stakeholder requirements and solution requirements, functional, non-functional, all that we have already talked about. The process of collect requirements, here again we have, what do we have? We have the scope management plan, we have the requirements management plan, we have the stakeholder management plan. Scope management plan and requirement management plan is understood. Stakeholder management plan is required for a list of identified stakeholders and the strategy we have developed for that. And we need to have a project charter here and stakeholder register. There's a list of registers, list of all the stakeholders. Okay, we have got a large number of tools and techniques here, and I need to define these a bit. Now, when you go to someone to collect the requirements, how will you decide to go to whom and what to ask, and based on how to analyze their data and how to go about it? It's very simple. If the audience you want to gather information from, they are very few, say 5 people or 2 people or 3 people, then in that case, I can directly go to that person for an interview. Maybe I can take time, I can interview, and I can discuss things out with it. So if the audience is too less and I have got ample time, I will go for interviews. An interview is good because this is a frank discussion between two parties, and not only frank, but once this is a private meeting, then both parties confide in each other, and there are a lot many things which are otherwise not discussed, and they come out in these kinds of interviews. Then there is another option. We can use focus groups. If the organization is a little bit large, and the person whom I want to interview, he does not know much about the details. So what he does is he asks me to that I will call all the experts, the focal group, who are working with me on this, and you ask your questions there. But this is when your boss is yet himself not really remembering anything by heart. Sometimes there are good bosses, and those good bosses can very easily remember all that. Okay, if the number of audience with whom you want to collect, from whom you want to collect the data is too large, maybe whole of the organization is required to provide an input, then we will do that through facilitation workshops. What is a facilitation workshop? In that we gather most of the people of the organization in a big hall, or conduct a seminar or something like that, and before you ask them what they want, you will present to them what you have already understood and what are your ideas, how you intend going about it. But from the audience, there might be certain pieces of requirement which you have never heard before, and they may be genuine or maybe not genuine. But these facilitated workshops will help us highlight those points which otherwise we may not be creating. Then is group creativity techniques. What is creativity? Creativity is thinking out of the box. Now, one person can easily think out of the box how to make the whole group that creative. And if this is a disorganized group, the jump out of the box, every person will be jumping in a different direction. Good and bad. Well, why creativity is good? Because like you have seen a James Bond movie back in 60s or 70s or somewhere, and at that time the instruments and gadgets shown in that movie were just a dream, just a figment of imagination of the author. But now you have got cameras of very small size. You keep using your mobile phones. That was a practical impossibility in those times. So why was it an impossibility? Because they were not even considered. They were not even discovered, invented. And naturally, if you don't have anything around you, you don't believe it. But the poets, the storytellers, they are the most creative of the peoples. They actually try to think across the logic, beyond the logic, and try to find whatever they catch. And that is a very good thing, because if you will go on a fishing trip, that is the only opportunity where you can fish. So if you are on a fishing trip, you may you may catch a big fish or a small fish. So if you are not using creative thinking, then you can't change yourself. So there are techniques by which you can induce creativity into the group, and I'm not going to discuss that right now. Then there is group decision making techniques. Normally it is thought that if we sit together, we can make better decisions. And definitely this is what the objective of such decision making sessions are. But the problem is that decision of a group is so bad, so poor, always and every time. Although we think that because we are sitting together, we will reach a better decision. But practically speaking, that is not the best decision. Decision is made just because we all compromised with each other and we went down to the lowest solution. So that decision taken, the person with the highest IQ, the decision and the IQ of the decision is not even equal to that person's IQ. Whereas if there were so many people and they were working together, the collective IQ of the decision should have been synergetically very high. But practically speaking, the decision making, uh, group decision making stops us from thinking, and we tend to follow others' lead. Therefore, whatever my boss says, I have to agree. No matter my own opinion is against it, but because my boss is saying that, so naturally, I will vote for him. When there are the groups which you want to ask questions are too big, you can't even reach them, then you resort to questionnaires and surveys. Like the census exercise going on these days, this is a kind of a form, a survey form, which is being distributed to all homes, and people fill it and return it back to you. So this is how you collect the data. So questionnaires and surveys for larger audiences is good. They can all answer those questions, and normally those questions are supposedly such that the results can be compared statistically. If it is a qualitative result, I ask you how are you, or you say I am very well. So this is a qualitative way of communicating with each other. But statistically speaking, when we have got, I said how many people will do this job, so all those interested would stand up, right? So one out of those people would be doing the job. Then we have got to have, we have to have a very good observation. prototyping, we should be able to create a model before we jump into the actual solution. Benchmarking is a skill of competing with others. Context diagram is again a tool in which how the project will flow is given, documents are analyzed. All these tools, they're not used simultaneously, but sometimes some of them can be used simultaneously, but generally this is not the case. So ultimately, you will come up with the requirements document and the requirements traceability metrics, which I have defined already. Just a moment, my computer is slightly held up. Okay, these are the various inputs, definitions. I mean, what are each one of these items? Can you give me a break for a minute or two? Right, I'm back. So I was just showing you all the inputs. These were all shown there, and these are the inputs which are being flashed. There's not much written here. This I have described to you. Interview. You can read the whole definition of it, but I have told you that this is interview is a qualitative way of collecting the data. In questionnaire, if I ask a question, you have to answer me in yes or no. So either this or that. But in interview, when I ask a question, you can give me a yes/no answer with explanation, or when you are explaining that thing to me, I may form my next question. All the questions I'm going to ask you in an interview are not written. So when we will discuss things, new items will come forward which can be discussed, and that's how we'll move on with our interview. And during this process, we will learn more than what was perceived before the interview. Focus groups, as I told you, brings together pre-qualified stakeholders and subject matter experts to learn about their expectations and attitudes about a proposed product. Then facilitated workshops, focused sessions that bring key stakeholders together to define product requirements. Workshops are considered a primary technique for quickly defining cross-functional requirements and reconciling stakeholder differences. You can read it through yourself. Now, group creativity techniques, I said there are certain techniques by which you can invoke the group into creativity, and that is, first is brainstorming. This is a technique used to generate and collect multiple ideas related to project and product requirements. No, people usually think logically. What we want is, if you want to be creative, you cannot be logical. So what we want is, we want to break the pattern. We want people to think sometimes illogically, out of the blue. So we try to coin unrelated ideas into the discussion, as if the people are diverted from their logical thinking and start focusing on that unrelated topic. And when they start thinking of the actual matter in discussion, that unrelated matter clings to their thought, which has never, these two things have never been thought together before. Therefore, whatever they come out with would be different from the normal logical approach. I don't know you get this or not, but I can explain it better with more examples sometime. Then there is a nominal group technique. This is a technique again enhances brainstorming with a voting process. You are doing the brainstorming thing, but at the same time, uh, you're coining ideas, you are bouncing ideas with each other, and then suddenly you say, okay, these are the three ideas. How many of you vote for this? How many for this? And how many for that? So whichever has the largest number of votes would win. That idea will win. So we have used brainstorming into nominal group. So nominal grouping can be done. Then is a mind mapping or idea mapping. This is a way of drawing your thoughts from a focal point spreading outwards. This is a very interesting tool, mind mapping. You see, this was created by Tony Buzan not very long ago, and I think in 70s or 80s or even later. Tony Buzan is a very famous person right now. He created this idea, and now there are so many books written on this. There are so many software available in the market on mind mapping. People are conducting meetings on mind mapping. People are creating projects on mind mapping. WBS is being created through mind mapping. The books are written based on mind mapping and things like that. In mind mapping, you take a big piece of paper, and right in the middle of page, you write the main matter which you want to deliberate on. Like, I'm trying to create a project, so I will write the name of the project right in the middle of the page. Then I consider, okay, how many parts my project will have, or how many phases my project should have. I say 5. So I bring out 5 lines out of the project and write those 5 phase names. Then what is included in a phase? I say phase 1 has got 3 items. So I bring 3 lines out of the phase 1. And this is all happening around the central idea. It is not a hierarchical structure like a work breakdown structure, but this is spreading from middle outwards. So you can keep jotting points till you reach the lowest part. You could, many of the people use it for WBS. They write the name of the project in the middle and start breaking the project like that. Many of the people write books like that. Write the name of the book in the middle, the chapters around it, and what will be included in each chapter. They keep spreading it. This is mind mapping, and this is very good for meeting management. This is very good. You write down your agenda this way, and whatever is being discussed in the meeting, you keep jotting points around in a circular way around at the appropriate place related to whatever title is being discussed. Affinity diagram is a technique that allows large number of ideas to be classified into groups for review and analysis. So if you have got so many ideas, then you can write down those ideas on different flip charts, and you can ask the whole group to go to any flip chart they like. So the people interested in one specific idea will go to that flip chart and they will start discussing that. Another group will gather around on another topic, another flip chart, and that's how the things go. Multi-criteria decision making, this is kind of a weighted average kind of a thing, a technique that utilizes a decision matrix to provide a systematic and analytical approach for establishing criteria such as risk levels, uncertainty, valuation. So all these things, they establish a criteria, this much marks for this much marks for this, and their weightage could be different, and everybody again votes for that, and ultimately what is the summary of all that is multi-criteria decision analysis. Like we do in procurements, when we are evaluating our contractors, subcontractors, or to be subcontractors, then we are doing a multi-criteria decision analysis. Okay, what next? Okay, can you see the slide question surveys? Okay, let me bring the slide up. Anyways, we did talk about the questionnaires and surveys, so there is no need to waste more time on it. Observations. Now, observation is a very interesting tool. Basically, what happens is that if you are going to, learn something about an organization, or you want to collect some data or requirements, there are certain things which would be visually visible to you when you enter their office space and see how they interact with each other, what is the decor of the office, and how things are done in that environment. So a lot many questions are answered as soon as you enter a facility. You don't ask a single question. You observe a lot many things and make up your mind what type of people are they, what type of work they are doing. So that will, just by observation, you will be able to collect some of the requirements. Prototyping, when you can't describe something in words, you use to draw. You will draw your idea on a piece of paper and try to make that understood to the other person. And if that is, even then he is not understanding, maybe you create a 3D model and through that you try to understand, make him understand. So you see, this is all called prototyping, in which you somehow devise mechanisms by which you are trying to make someone understand. Prototyping is used in this. Benchmarking is, again, people confuse in benchmarking. They say benchmarking is against some industry standard. You do not benchmark yourself against some industry standard. Benchmarking is always done against your competitors. You are one of the competitors. There are 5 other competitors, and uh, your position is maybe fourth in the group. So you try to find out, why am I fourth? What are the various characteristics on which we are being judged, and in which characteristic where do I stand? So if you can, as compared to my competitors, so if I have 5 competitors, I will say, okay, in honesty, I stand third. In truthfulness, I stand first. And in delivery of services, I stand fifth. So that way you can assess in which areas you need to improve. So benchmarking helps you get that. Context diagram is an example of a scope model. Context diagram visually depicts the product scope, showing a business system. It shows the processes, the equipment, the computer systems, etc., and how people and other actors interact with it. Then is the document analysis. The old documents of that organization could be studied to learn about them. And the resultant is the requirement document and the traceability matrix. Requirements documents, again, the same thing I have discussed already. Traceability matrix I've also explained to you. Tracing includes, but is not limited to, tracing requirements for many purposes. Like following are the reasons: tracing requirement to the business need, the opportunity, goals, or objectives; tracing requirement to the project objective; tracing requirement to the scope and WBS of the deliverable; to the product design, to the product development, to the test strategy and test scenario. So your requirement must be connected with lot many things. Why are we connecting my requirements to all these? Because if tomorrow this requirement changes or completely eliminates, then which are the things which I will see they have been impacted or not. This is the format of kind of a sample format for traceability matrix, requirement traceability matrix. But again, I would say, if there is a format given in PMP, okay, that is not just the only option. This is just an example given to you because there are certain items for which even examples are not readily available in the market. And then we define the scope. And define the scope, you see, as we have already discussed, we want to create the scope in detail. And as I said, first you provide, you translate the requirements into product scope. Then you define the project scope. Then you select various alternatives, analyze them, select the best alternative. Then you divide your selected approach into certain number of phases and define the deliverable for each phase and how it will be checked and who will be responsible. And then you have a lot many other things. And by the way, if you are doing all this scope must have been justified. Therefore, in the very beginning of your paper of scope statement, you justify, yes, this is possible and I can do it. This is how I can do it. So when you start explaining how I will do it, whether you say it or not, this is already taken as granted that because it can be done, therefore you say you will do it. So by providing this scope statement, you are automatically committing that I can do it and I will do it. So as I said before, it is a project justification, major deliverables and the project objectives, and it also provides the criteria used to determine if the project or phase has been successfully completed. Scope statement should give you the product acceptance criteria for the project as well as for the phase, project deliverables and phase deliverables, project what is not included in the project assumptions and constraints. The process is scope management plan is required because naturally how to do this is written in the scope management plan. Project charter is required. Requirement documents are required to trace back and the organization process assets. And you can see here there are very few places where enterprise environmental factor and organization processes are not used. Here enterprise environmental factor is not required. Why? Because we are not basing on any outside internal or external factors the definition of our scope. We are basing it purely on the input documents. There is scope management plan, the charter and the requirement document. They are enough to give me this, and there is no other force which affects internally or externally my scope statement. So I use the expert judgment. Products are analyzed. Product analysis, this is exactly what I said. We thoroughly analyze the product and that would define the product scope. Then we do the alternative generation. As I said, what are your approaches? How many approaches can be possible? Which is the best approach? That is the alternative generation. And once we have done all that, then we can conduct a facilitated workshop and give our findings in front of the larger audience within the organization. Maybe this could serve as some feedback and we can improve our solution. Ultimately, we develop the scope statement and the project document, and you understand that scope statement will be baseline along with the WBS and WBS dictionary, which will be the next step. The next process is create WBS. So in defined scope, you see organizational process assets are required, charter is required, scope management plan and requirement management plan is required, and the project documents will be updated. The scope statement is not only given to the create WBS, but later on when we are working in the planning of time schedule, for sequencing purposes, we also need this scope statement. For estimation of the activity durations, we also need the scope statement. And ultimately, when we are developing the Gantt chart or the schedule, then we also need the scope statement. So these diagrams are very useful in exactly determining which is required by whom and when. So these are all the inputs and tools and outputs. Right. I think I should close here because WBS is a little elaborate and I would like to discuss it separately tomorrow. And I think whatever we have studied so far must have been of some use to you. And if you have any questions right now, you can ask those. Over to you.
सर एग्जाम पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से ये सारी चीजें याद करना जरूरी है या समझ लेना काफी है?
समझ लेना जरूरी है. कुछ आइटम्स ऐसे टर्म्स हैं like you see create WBS, it is to be presented in exactly the same way. You can't say WBS creation. These are the exact words how the process is called. So these are to be remembered, but at the same time उसको रट्टा लगाने वाली बात तो है कोई नहीं है. तो इसको मतलब अगर आपने समझ लिया है अच्छी तरह से तो आपसे ये गलती नहीं हो. बट एनीवेज कुछ लोग कहते हैं खाली रट्टे से एग्जाम पास हो जाता है, जो मैं बिल्कुल भी नहीं मानता. You have to, study and you have to understand. Understanding is the main thing. If you can understand the logic, जिस तरह मैं आपसे बातें कर रहा हूं ना, एग्जैक्टली इस तरह आपका दिमाग आपसे बातें करे. जब आप इसके बाद प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजमेंट बॉडी ऑफ नॉलेज को कभी पढ़ेंगे, जब तफसील में पढ़ेंगे, तो जब ये सब लफ्ज पढ़ रहे होंगे आप, तो उस वक्त ये जो हम बातें कर रहे हैं, अभी तो शायद आपको कभी कभी कुछ चीजें बंदा थोड़ा सा ऑफ भी हो जाता है, लेकिन जब आप पढ़ रहे होंगे एग्जाम की तैयारी के लिए, तो ये सारे आप समझें रिकॉर्डिंग आपके कान में गूंज रही होगी कि अच्छा यार इधर ये कहा था, इधर ये एग्जाम बात की थी. तो वो दैट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. सो ट्राई टू, अगर आपका माइंड क्लियर हो गया है तो आप फिक्र ना करें, फिर इंशाल्लाह आप पास भी हो जाएंगे.
ओके सर, थैंक यू.
एनीबॉडी एल्स? मुबशिर आप बिल्कुल नहीं बोले भाई. मुबशिर ने ना बात नहीं करनी. गाजी
जी सर.
जी, एनी क्वेश्चंस?
नहीं सर, क्लियर है सर.
क्लियर.
स्टडी मजीद करेंगे तो और क्लियर इंशाल्लाह हो जाएगा सर.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल. रिजवान साहब माइक बंद करके बैठे हुए हैं, क्या हाल है जनाब? कोई क्वेश्चन वगैरह है?
सर ये रिक्वायरमेंट्स ट्रेसेबिलिटी मैट्रिक्स की ये जो थोड़ी थी अपना जो ये जो टेबल सा बना हुआ है,
जी जी.
ये थोड़ा सा अगर बता देते कैसे फिल करना होता है तो जरा
कुछ भी नहीं.
मोटा मोटा सर.
मैं चला जाता हूँ वापस टेबल के ऊपर. उसमें कुछ भी नहीं है. देखिए वो तो एक सैंपल के तौर पे दिया हुआ है, और उसको आप ये इस तरह की चीजें जो दी होती हैं, इनको सिर्फ आप अपनी गाइडेंस के लिए इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं. यहाँ पे वो ये कहता है इस टेबल में, अगर मैं टेबल आपको अभी नजर आना शुरू हो जाए.
जी सर.
यस. इसमें वो ये कहता है, अच्छा बना हुआ है टेबल, बहुत अच्छा बना हुआ है. कहता है जी प्रोजेक्ट का नाम क्या है, कॉस्ट सेंटर क्या है, प्रोजेक्ट डिस्क्रिप्शन जो ऊपर लिख लें, और यहाँ पे आपने वो जो WBS के नंबर है ना, वो आपने सारे यहाँ लिख लेने हैं. हर रिक्वायरमेंट को एक नंबर देना है, उसकी एसोसिएशन का नंबर देना है, वो किस चीज से एसोसिएटेड है. रिक्वायरमेंट लिखें कि जी ये बोतल का ढकना बनाना है. अब आप कहेंगे कि बोतल का ढकना मेरी कौन सी बिजनेस नीड पूरी कर रहा है, कौन सी ऐसी अपॉर्चुनिटी है जिसको ये पॉइंट कर रहा है, कौन सा गोल है जो इससे अचीव होगा, कौन सा ऑब्जेक्टिव है, उसका नंबर यहाँ पे लिख दें, या उसको ब्रीफली यहाँ पे लिख दें. उसके बाद ये तो है ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की नीड्स, और वो है ना. फिर है प्रोजेक्ट का कौन सा ऑब्जेक्टिव पूरा हो रहा है इस रिक्वायरमेंट को पूरा करने से, और इस रिक्वायरमेंट को पूरा करने के लिए WBS के अंदर मैंने कौन सा डिलीवरेबल रखा हुआ है, और प्रोडक्ट के डिजाइन में इसको कहाँ कैटर किया है, और प्रोडक्ट के डेवलपमेंट में मैंने इसे कहाँ कैटर किया है, इसके टेस्ट केसेस क्या होंगे. तो आप ये देखेंगे कि मुकम्मल ट्रेस बन जाता है आपका कि आपकी रिक्वायरमेंट जो है वो तमाम जगहों पे, मतलब बिला सोचे समझे नहीं हम काम कर रहे हैं. अगर हम ये समझते हैं कि मिसाल के तौर पे अगर तो ये चीज जरूरी है और आपने उस चीज को टेस्ट ही नहीं किया, तो वो तो अनटेस्टेड चलेगी ना मार्केट में या कस्टमर के पास. तो उसके टेस्ट केसेस भी डिफाइन करें अगर वो चीज इतनी ही इंपॉर्टेंट है, अगर वो वाकई रिक्वायरमेंट है. तो ये वो चीजें हैं जिसके साथ उसे इक्वेट करके देख सकते हैं.
सही. काइंड ऑफ डिलीवरेबल भी ट्रेसेबल हो जाएगा ना इससे, अगर रिक्वायरमेंट
का पूरा चेन. असल में मैं आपको वजह बताता हूँ. हुआ ये कि आपने कहा कि ये एक नई रिक्वायरमेंट एक स्टेक होल्डर ने दे दी. अब मुझे पसंद आई, मैंने कहा हाँ यार, अब मैं जज कर रहा हूँ ना, जस्टिफाई कर रहा हूँ. मैं कहता हूँ हाँ यार रिक्वायरमेंट तो ठीक है और ये हमारे बिजनेस ऑब्जेक्टिव्स के हिसाब से भी ठीक है, हमारे लिए एक बड़ी अपॉर्चुनिटी भी बन रही है। तो वो जो चीजें हैं जहां जहां उसके लिंक बन रहे हैं वो मैं यहाँ लिखता जाता हूँ और ये मेरी जस्टिफिकेशन बनती है कि व्हाई आई हैव रिकमेंडेड दिस रिक्वायरमेंट टू बी इंक्लूडेड इन द प्रोजेक्ट। अच्छा, अब कल कलाम अगर ये रिक्वायरमेंट खत्म हो जाती है तो मैं ये पूरी लाइन काटूंगा। इसका मतलब है कि मैंने जो जो ऑब्जेक्टिव इसके साथ लिंक किए थे वो ब्रेक करूंगा, ताकि अगर उस ऑब्जेक्टिव को पूरा करने के लिए ये रिक्वायरमेंट जरूरी थी तो फिर तो हम तो रिक्वायरमेंट कह रहे हैं अब है ही नहीं, या तो ये रिक्वायरमेंट खत्म ना हो या वो ऑब्जेक्टिव जो है वो बदल जाए। अच्छा, ये भी होगा कि आपकी बिजनेस नीड बदल जाती है या ऑब्जेक्टिव बदल जाता है तो रिक्वायरमेंट खत्म हो जाती है किसी चीज की। जब रिक्वायरमेंट खत्म होती है तो उस रिक्वायरमेंट को निकाल के बाहर फेंकें। तो इस ट्रेसेबिलिटी से हम ट्रैक करते हैं। अब मिसाल के तौर पे आपने वो चीज बना ली है, अब रिक्वायरमेंट खत्म हो गई है एंड अब रिक्वायरमेंट जो है खत्म हो गई है, अब आप जनाब को जरूरत ही कुछ नहीं है उसके ऊपर करने की। पता चले जी आप तो पुराने कागजों पे चल रहे हैं, आप उसके टेस्ट केसेस रन कर रहे हैं, आप उसकी प्रोडक्ट डेवलपमेंट में इन्वॉल्व हैं। कौन ट्रेस करके बताएगा कि जनाब अब तो ये तो शुरू शुरू में हुक्म में आया था कि ये बनाना है, आप तो इसके बारे में ऑर्डर आ चुका है, बनानी ही नहीं है इस चीज को, तो आप क्यों बनाई जा रहे हैं इसको, आप क्यों उसकी टेस्ट केसेस कर रहे हैं, इतनी एफर्ट जाया क्यों कर रहे हैं आप। जी जनाब, और कुछ?
नो सर, थैंक यू वेरी मच।
ओके जी, मोस्ट वेलकम, थैंक यू वेरी मच। और कल इंशाल्लाह फिर हम इसी तरह मिलेंगे। मुझे लगता है कि शायद अगला थर्सडे, फ्राइडे को तुम्हारी क्लास होती है कि नहीं होती? होती है थर्सडे और फ्राइडे।
फ्राइडे को होती है सर।
होती है सर।
थर्सडे और फ्राइडे को मेरी एक और जगह क्लास है, तो शायद थर्सडे फ्राइडे को मैं क्लास ना ले सकूं, या फिर अगर आप
नो
सेट
प्रॉब्लम सर।
लेट कर सकते हैं वो हो सकता है, क्योंकि मैं 10 बजे तक वापस आ जाऊंगा। तो आप लोग
काफी लेट हो जाएगा सर।
पूछूंगा आपसे।
सर अगर अर्ली हो सके तो।
अर्ली ये है कि मैं 3 से 5 कैसा रहेगा? नहीं सॉरी, 3 से 5 तो मेरी क्लास है पहले से, 3 से 5 तो क्लास है।
ऑफिस होता है सर, 6 बजे तक तो ऑफिस होता है
कोई
सर।
ना, तो वो जो यही है, या तो लेट नाइट किया जाए, अगर आपको दूसरी तरफ से कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है तो डेट आगे चली जाए, क्या फर्क पड़ता है।
नो इशू सर, डेट आगे चली जाए, कोई मसला नहीं सर।
डेट आगे चली जाए सर, नो इशू।
हाँ बिल्कुल ठीक है। तो बस ये ज़हन में रखिएगा कि थर्सडे और फ्राइडे को क्लास नहीं हम कर रहे। ठीक है जी।
ठीक है सर।
राइट सर।
और कोई मसला हुआ तो भी मैं फिर बाद में कल डिस्कस कर लेंगे।
ओके सर, थैंक यू वेरी मच।
ओके जी, थैंक यू वेरी मच, टेक केयर, बाय।
अल्लाह हाफिज।
अल्लाह हाफिज।